The city looks different at 3 in the morning. Glass towers become monuments to ambition, their windows dark except for the scattered lights of people like me, the ones who stay late because leaving feels like surrender. From the 42nd floor, San Francisco spreads out in geometric patterns of possibility and regret. Every lit window tells a story about deadlines, desperation, or the particular loneliness of people who measure their worth in deliverables. I was debugging authentication flows when I found it, not looking for it exactly, just following the code the way you follow a thread through a labyrinth, pulling gently, seeing where it leads. The authentication service had been throwing intermittent errors for weeks. Nothing catastrophic, just warnings that appeared in logs at odd hours and disappeared before anyone could investigate properly. But I've learned that systems speak in whispers before they scream. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago. Beyond my reflection in the window, dark hair pulled back, eyes tired but focused. The city sprawled in all directions, oblivious to the discovery taking shape on my screen. I pulled up the architecture diagrams, those beautiful lies we tell ourselves about how systems actually work. Traced the connections between services, ran load calculations against our current traffic patterns and projected growth. Every number confirmed what my instincts had already known. Our entire payment processing system, 200 million in transactions annually, the beating heart of a company that employed 83 people and had just filed for Series C funding, was held together by assumptions that stopped being true 6 months ago. The database connection pool was sized for last year's traffic. The authentication service had memory leaks that compounded under load. The microservice mesh had retry logic that would create cascade failures at scale. We were one traffic spike away from catastrophic failure. Not might be. Were. The mathematics were clear, beautiful even, in their inevitability. Systems have breaking points. Ours was approximately 15,000 concurrent users. We were currently at 12,000, growing at 8% weekly. I did the math. 3 weeks, maybe 4, if we got lucky and growth slowed. I should have felt panic. Should have immediately pulled the emergency cord, woken up the engineering team, started the war room protocols. Instead, I felt something colder and more precise. The same feeling you get when you solve a difficult proof. Not triumph exactly, but recognition. The satisfaction of seeing through complexity to the simple, brutal truth underneath. I pushed back from my desk, stood, walked to the window. 42 floors below, the city sprawled in all its 3 a.m. emptiness. A few cars on the streets, streetlights marking geometry. The Bay Bridge suspended over dark water, its lights reflecting like a promise of connection between places that maybe shouldn't be connected at all. Somewhere in this city, Jonathan was probably sleeping. Dreaming CEO dreams about valuations and exits, and the next glass tower with his name in the lobby. Tomorrow he'd wake up, put on that platinum watch, walk into the office like someone who'd built something permanent. And I'd have to tell him that everything he'd built was structurally unsound. I spent the next 72 hours documenting everything. Barely left the office. Ordered food I forgot to eat. Showered in the executive bathroom at dawn. Changed into the spare clothes I kept in my desk drawer. Items that had accumulated over 8 months of nights exactly like this one. The work consumed me. Not just the technical details, though those were precise enough to satisfy any skeptic. Anyone could find bugs if they knew where to look. What mattered was the story. I mapped the business impact, quantified the revenue loss, documented the reputational damage, traced the exact sequence of events that would unfold when the system finally buckled under its own success. Each slide built on the last, architecture diagrams showing how services interconnected, load projections based on growth patterns, failure scenarios with cascading effects visualized, cost calculations for remediation at different stages, cheap if we started now, expensive if we waited, catastrophic if we did nothing. I built models that showed how the failure would cascade. Database connections exhausted first, triggering automatic failovers to secondary systems that were also undersized. Application servers timing out, their response queues backing up like blood in a failing heart. Authentication service overwhelmed by retry logic, creating a feedback loop that would take down adjacent services. The whole platform collapsing inward like a star reaching the end of its fuel. I ran simulations, prepared 3 different remediation strategies with cost projections and implementation timelines, built executive summaries, created technical appendices, documented every assumption, every calculation, every conclusion. Made the work bulletproof because I knew exactly who would try to shoot it down. Strategy 1. Immediate intervention. Shut down non-critical services. Implement emergency capacity upgrades, except 3 days of reduced functionality. Cost: $800,000. Probability of success: 95%. Strategy 2. Phased remediation. Implement fixes over 2 weeks. Maintain full functionality. Accept increased risk during transition. Cost: $1.2 million. Probability of success: 80%. Strategy 3. Do nothing. Wait for catastrophic failure. Implement fixes in crisis mode. Accept complete platform outage. Cost: unknown, but certainly above $5 million when accounting for lost revenue, customer attrition, reputational damage, and the premium pricing that emergency work commands. Probability of success: uncertain. I knew which one Jonathan would choose. Knew it before I finished the slides. Do nothing was always the cheapest option until the bill came due. The presentation was 147 slides. Every claim sourced, every risk quantified, every solution stress tested, charts showing failure modes, graphs projecting costs, timelines showing implementation paths, a comprehensive risk assessment that read like a prophecy. It was the best work I'd ever done. The kind of analysis that turns careers. The kind of insight that proves you see things other people miss. On the 3rd morning, I sent the calendar invite. Critical infrastructure review. Board presentation. Marked it high priority. Attached the executive summary. Included links to the full analysis. Tagged Jonathan Chen, our CTO, the CFO, the head of operations, 3 board members. Jonathan accepted within minutes. So did everyone else. The meeting was set for Friday at 9 a.m., 5 days away. Enough time for them to review the materials. Enough time for the weight of what I'd discovered to sink in. I went home for the first time in 3 days. My apartment felt strange, like returning to a place you used to live, but don't quite remember. I showered until the water ran cold. Changed into the charcoal suit I saved for important meetings. Wool that moved like confidence, cut to suggest competence without aggression. Put on the shoes that made me 2 inches taller. Applied lipstick the color of certainty. In the mirror, I looked like someone whose work mattered. Someone who'd spent 72 hours turning chaos into clarity. Someone the board would listen to. I believed that was enough. I believed that truth, properly documented, was armor. I slept for 12 hours and dreamed of systems that worked the way they were supposed to. Jonathan Chen had the kind of charisma that made you forget to question him. Yale pedigree, with the accent softened just enough to sound accessible. 2 previous exits, both acquisitions that made early employees wealthy and left founders with reputations that opened doors. a speaking style that turned technical decisions into narratives of inevitable success, every setback reframed as strategic pivot, every risk presented as calculated courage. He wore custom suits, Savile Row probably, though he'd never say, and vintage watches that caught light like promises. Moved through our open plan office like he owned the air itself, which, in the legal sense that matters to venture capitalists and stock option agreements, he did. 18% equity, enough to be wealthy if we succeeded, enough to be devastated if we failed. I'd watched him work for 8 months, watched him charm venture capitalists into believing our burn rate was strategy rather than desperation, watched him convince the engineering team that 100-hour weeks were passion, not exploitation. Watched him transform every missed deadline into proof of our ambition, every technical failure into evidence of our willingness to push boundaries. He'd hired me himself, flew me out from Seattle, put me up in a hotel with a view of the bay, took me to dinner at a restaurant where the waiters knew his name, told me over wine that cost more than my rent that the company needed people who saw the whole system, not just their piece of it. Called me brilliant, visionary. Said most engineers were mechanics, but I was an architect. I'd wanted to believe him, had believed him, in the way you believe people who say things you've always wanted to hear. 8 months later, I still didn't know if he'd meant any of it, or if sincerity was just another tool in his arsenal. The morning of the presentation arrived with the particular clarity of days you've been anticipating for too long. I woke before my alarm. Made coffee I didn't drink. Checked my email 3 times. The presentation was there, pristine in our shared drive, exactly where I'd left it, 147 slides. Truth rendered in sans serif fonts and carefully chosen colors. I arrived at the office early, 7:15. The building was still mostly empty, just security and the cleaning crew and a few other people who measured their dedication in arrival times. The conference room on the 42nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. In the dawn light, those buildings looked sharp enough to cut. Glass and steel and ambition rendered in architecture. I set up my laptop, tested the projector, arranged my notes in neat stacks, adjusted the chairs so everyone would have a clear view, checked the presentation one more time, scrolling through slides that represented 3 days of work and 8 months of accumulated understanding. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. Jonathan walked in at 8:55, 5 minutes before the scheduled start. Alone. Something about the solitude registered before anything else. No CFO. No board members. No operations director. Just Jonathan, in a navy suit that probably cost what I made in a week. Platinum watch catching morning light. Maya. He smiled the way people smile before delivering bad news. The kind of smile that says, I'm about to disappoint you, but I need you to understand it's not personal. We need to talk. Something cold settled behind my ribs. That feeling you get when you realize the script has changed and nobody gave you the new pages. The presentation's at 9, I said. Kept my voice level. Professional. The tone I'd practiced in the mirror that morning. About that? He sat down across from me, adjusted his cufflinks. Platinum, I noticed, matching the watch. Small signals of success. I reviewed your materials last night. Very thorough work. Really comprehensive analysis. But I have some concerns about the timing. Timing. That corporate word that means no without having to say it directly. The timing's wrong, I said. Not a question. A translation. We're in the middle of Series C, negotiations. Critical phase. The investors are excited about our growth trajectory, our market position, our technical capabilities. Showing the board a presentation about infrastructure vulnerabilities right now would be counterproductive. It could raise questions we don't need raised. I watched him carefully. The way his hands moved when he talked, the slight tension in his jaw that suggested this conversation wasn't entirely comfortable for him either. He was good at this. Probably practiced in the mirror, too, in his own way. More counterproductive than the platform failing during peak trading hours? I kept my voice calm. Reasonable. The tone you use when you're trying to make someone see logic they're determined to avoid. He leaned back, that smile still in place, but different now. Harder. The kind of expression that reminds you about power dynamics and org charts. You're being dramatic, Maya. These are theoretical risks. Edge cases. The system's been stable for months. We've handled growth before. We've handled linear growth. This is exponential. And these aren't edge cases, Jonathan. It's mathematics. The database connection pool is sized for last year's traffic. We're at 87% capacity now, growing 8% weekly. In 3 weeks. Mathematics. He said it like the word tasted bitter, like I'd committed a social error by mentioning something as crude as numbers. You know what else is mathematics? Our runway, our valuation, the 83 people who depend on this company for their livelihoods, the 20 million we're raising to hire another 50 engineers. I appreciate your diligence, I really do. But you need to see the bigger picture here. The bigger picture. That phrase felt like a door closing, like being told you're too focused on details when the details are the only things that matter. So, we're canceling, I said. Flat. Declarative. No question mark because there was no question. Postponing. Until after the funding closes. 2-3 weeks at most. Then we can have this conversation with the board. When the timing's better, when we have the resources to address everything properly. He stood, straightened his tie. That gesture of someone preparing to leave. I've already sent the cancellation notices. Apologized for the confusion. Told them we'd reschedule. Already sent. Past tense. This wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. You understand, he added. Not a question, a statement, or maybe a command disguised as assumption. I nodded, smiled, said something about being a team player, about understanding the bigger picture, about appreciating his guidance. The words came automatically, muscle memory from 8 months of corporate translation. Watched him leave with that easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his right to make decisions for other people. The door closed. The conference room felt very large suddenly, very empty. Through the windows, the financial district gleamed in morning sun, oblivious to small betrayals and glass towers. I sat there for a moment, looked at my laptop, at the presentation that was supposed to matter, at my notes arranged in neat stacks that nobody would read. Then I opened the shared drive to delete the presentation. Professional courtesy. Clean up after yourself. Remove the evidence of effort that wasn't wanted. It was already gone, not moved to trash, not archived, not relocated to some folder marked later or under review. Deleted. Permanently. No recovery option available. Like it had never existed. I stared at the empty space where the file should have been. Refreshed the page. Checked my local cache. Searched by file name. Nothing. Just the hollow absence of 3 days' work rendered invisible. I checked the file history. The audit log that tracks every action in our corporate systems. Found the entry immediately because it was the only one. Jonathan Chen, 2:37 a.m. Critical Infrastructure Review Presentation. Action. Permanently deleted. 2:37 in the morning, hours before our conversation. Before he'd walked into this conference room with that apologetic smile. Before he'd talked about timing and bigger pictures and team players. He hadn't canceled the meeting because of timing. He'd erased it because he didn't want anyone else to know what I'd found. I closed my laptop, looked out at the city. Those glass buildings that had looked sharp at dawn now just looked fragile. Pretty lies about permanence, rendered in materials that shatter. Jonathan's platinum watch flashed through my memory, the way it had caught the light while he lied to my face. I gathered my notes, unplugged my laptop, left the conference room exactly as I'd found it, chairs arranged for a meeting that would never happen. In the elevator down to my desk, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind that feels like destiny. Just a small, cold choice about what kind of person I wanted to be. He'd deleted my presentation, but he couldn't delete what I knew. I spent the rest of that day in a state of controlled fury. The kind that burns cold rather than hot. The kind that clarifies rather than clouds. Not because he deleted my work. Work is replaceable. I had backups, multiple copies on my personal drives, detailed notes in my encrypted archives, every calculation preserved in formats he couldn't touch. Jonathan could delete files all he wanted. He could erase evidence from corporate systems. He could make presentations disappear from shared drives. But he couldn't delete what I knew. Couldn't unwrite the code. Couldn't change the mathematics. The vulnerabilities remained, patient and inevitable, waiting for the moment when theory would become catastrophe. No. The fury came from understanding what the deletion meant. He'd read it. Had to have read it. You don't delete a presentation at 3 in the morning unless you've absorbed every word, followed every argument, traced every conclusion to its logical end. Which meant he'd understood the risks, had seen the same failure patterns I'd documented, had recognized the inevitability of what was coming, and he'd chosen to hide it anyway. I pulled up the company calendar on my laptop. Series C, financing. Documents uploaded to the data room 2 weeks ago. Final due diligence calls happening now. Projected close date, 3 weeks out, give or take. Valuation, $240 million. I did the math. Jonathan's equity, 18%. Simple multiplication. His shares would be worth $43 million when the deal closed. 43 million reasons to make inconvenient truths disappear. 43 million ways to rationalize silence. Worth considerably less if the board learned the platform was structurally unsound. If investors discovered that the technical foundation they were buying into was weeks away from collapse. If due diligence turned up evidence that critical risks had been identified and deliberately concealed. The mathematics were simple, brutal, clear. I could have gone to the board directly. Should have. Probably. Sent them my presentation. Documented what Jonathan had done. Let corporate governance take its course. That would have been the responsible thing. The by-the-book response to discovering that your CTO was hiding material risks from investors and the board. But something about the way he'd smiled while lying to my face made me want to do this differently. Something about that platinum watch, that practiced ease, the confidence of someone who'd learned that charisma could override evidence, that narrative could trump data, that being liked mattered more than being right. So instead, I did what I do best. I watched, I documented, I waited. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost in the system, present but invisible, attending meetings, writing code, responding to emails with professional efficiency, playing the role of team player while privately tracking every metric that mattered. System load, increasing. Transaction volumes, accelerating, response times, degrading, database query patterns, showing early signs of resource contention. The technical debt accumulating in our code base like sediment in an artery, every indicator pointing toward the same conclusion. The numbers were getting worse. Not dramatically, not in ways that would trigger immediate alarms, just consistently, predictably, mathematically worse. The kind of decline that's invisible until suddenly it isn't. We'd launched a partnership with 3 major brokerages the previous month. Strategic win, Jonathan had called it. Proof of market validation. Press releases celebrating our growth. Their users were starting to migrate to our platform. Slowly at first, then faster as network effects kicked in. Traffic growing exponentially. 8% weekly, exactly as I'd calculated. Every day brought us closer to the thresholds I'd identified in my deleted presentation. The numbers I'd shown Jonathan at 3 in the morning while he decided which mattered more, truth or $43 million. I sent him emails, polite ones, professional ones, each documenting a new warning sign. Database connection pool at 92% capacity. Authentication service response times increasing. Memory usage trending upward. Retry logic creating feedback loops under sustained load. His responses came back like form letters, reassurances that felt increasingly hollow the more I read them. Systems holding steady. Thanks for the vigilance. You're overthinking this, Maya. Trust the architecture. We've weathered growth before. No reason to panic. I saved every message. Built an archive of warnings ignored, risks dismissed, truth made inconvenient. Not because I was planning revenge, because I understood that in systems, technical or human, documentation is the difference between accident and negligence. The office had a rhythm during those weeks. Surface normalcy masking underlying tension. People worked their usual hours, attended their usual meetings, delivered their usual updates. But I could feel it, the pressure building, like watching a gauge climb toward red while everyone else checked email and planned happy hours and pretended the warning lights weren't flashing. I started arriving earlier, staying later. Not because the work required it, but because I needed to see the patterns. Needed to document the exact moment when theory would become disaster. The systems told their story in logs and metrics and error rates that accumulated like evidence at a crime scene. Other engineers noticed. Sarah from Platform Team asked if everything was okay. I showed her the database connection metrics, watched her face change as she understood what the numbers meant. She asked if Jonathan knew. I showed her the email thread, watched her face change again, differently this time. That particular expression people get when they realize someone in authority is willfully ignoring danger. She didn't say anything, just nodded, went back to her desk. Started making her own backups, I noticed. Started documenting her own warnings. Smart woman. She'd learned the same lesson I had. In systems designed to ignore truth, the best you can do is create an evidence trail. 2 days before the Series C closed, we hit 96% on database connections. I sent Jonathan another email, detailed, specific, included graphs showing the trajectory. Calculated we had approximately 48 hours before hitting critical threshold. His response came back in minutes. Platform's performing well. Series C closes Friday. Let's discuss capacity planning next quarter. Focus on the win right now. Focus on the win. Like disaster was just attitude. Like mathematics cared about quarterly planning cycles. I printed that email, put it in a folder with all the others. Evidence that wouldn't disappear when someone decided to clean up the digital trail. The Series C closed on a Friday afternoon in October. Perfect timing, Jonathan said in the all-hands meeting. Just before the holiday season. Maximum momentum into Q4. The announcement went out at 3 p.m. Press release with Jonathan's face prominently featured. That practiced smile, suggesting this was both expected and earned. The tech blogs praised our growth trajectory. The financial press called us a unicorn in waiting. Industry analysts cited our expansion into institutional trading as evidence of category leadership. $240 million. Series C, Jonathan Chen, visionary CTO, talking about the incredible journey ahead. He bought champagne for the office. The expensive kind? Labels I didn't recognize, but that tasted like celebration. Made a speech about vision and teamwork, and the 83 people who'd believed in this company when it was just an idea. Talked about hiring, expansion, the engineering challenges we'd conquer together. His watch caught the afternoon light as he raised his glass. Platinum. Expensive. The kind of thing people buy when they're celebrating certainty, when they believe they've won. I stood at the edge of the crowd, drinking water while everyone else drank champagne, watching the metrics on my laptop that nobody else was looking at. Database connections, 94%. Authentication service, showing intermittent timeouts. System load, approaching critical thresholds. The mathematics were patient, inevitable, coming due. We hit the critical threshold at 11:43 p.m. that night, exactly 17 days after Jonathan deleted my presentation. Exactly 18 hours and 27 minutes after he'd raised that champagne glass and smiled like winning was permanent. I was watching when it happened. Had been watching all day, really. Waiting for the moment when theory would prove itself in the most expensive way possible. The first alert was almost gentle. Database connection pool exhaustion. Standard warning. The kind that usually resolves itself. Then another. Authentication service timeouts. Then 3 more. Then 12. Then the avalanche. Every failure mode I'd documented in slide 63. Every cascade pattern I'd modeled. Every prediction I'd made coming true with the precision of mathematics that don't care about timing or funding rounds or $43 million paydays. The system was collapsing exactly the way I'd known it would. The alerts started like distant thunder. First, the database connection pool. Red lights appearing on my monitoring dashboard. Connections exhausted. Failover triggered. Secondary systems activated. Then those connections exhausted too. Then the application servers. Response times spiking from milliseconds to seconds. Request queues backing up like blood pooling behind a dam. Timeout errors propagating through the system. Circuit breakers opening. Services isolating themselves. The microservice mesh fragmenting into islands of dysfunction. Then the authentication service. Overwhelmed by retry logic. Every failed request spawning 3 more attempts. Exponential growth in the worst possible way. Creating the exact cascading failure pattern I'd predicted in slide 63 of the presentation Jonathan Chen had deleted at 2:37 in the morning. 18 hours and 27 minutes after the funding announcement, the entire platform stopped responding. I was at home when it happened. Had been home for hours, actually. In my kitchen, laptop open on the counter beside an untouched glass of wine. I'd known this was coming the way you know a storm is approaching. By reading the signs, everyone else was too distracted or too invested or too afraid to notice. The monitoring dashboard on my screen looked like a war zone. Red everywhere. Hundreds of alerts firing simultaneously. The kind of system failure that makes engineers wake up in cold sweats. The kind that costs millions of dollars and destroys reputations and ends careers. My phone started ringing at 11:51 p.m. Jonathan, I looked at his name on the screen, thought about the platinum watch, the deleted presentation, the champagne celebration that afternoon. Let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately, and again. By the fourth call, texts were starting to arrive. Other team members, the support queue melting down, customers locked out, transactions failing, revenue bleeding into the void at hundreds of dollars per second. I finished my wine slowly, deliberately, poured another glass, watched the alerts multiply on my screen like small red fires consuming everything Jonathan had built. At 12:37 a.m., the Slack war room opened. Jonathan had created it, invited the entire engineering team, operations, even the CFO. Messages scrolling past too fast to read individual words, just panic rendered in text. The digital equivalent of watching people run through burning hallways. Jonathan's messages stood out, all capitals, desperate in ways I'd never seen from him. The smooth confidence completely gone, just raw fear about something breaking that he couldn't charm or narrative his way past. Where is Maya? Has anyone talked to Maya? Someone get Maya on the call. Now we need her immediately. I let him wait. Not out of cruelty. Not exactly. But because timing matters. Because desperation clarifies things that confidence obscures. Because I wanted him to understand what it felt like when the systems you've built, and the stories you've told, and the lies you've made yourself believe all collapse simultaneously. After 11 minutes, I tracked it precisely. I typed slowly, deliberately, "I'm here." His response came back in seconds. All caps dissolved into frantic lowercase. "Maya, thank God. Emergency Zoom, link in thread. Join now, please." I clicked through. 23 faces appeared on my screen, arranged in that grid pattern that makes everyone look equally small and equally desperate. Most in various stages of panic or exhaustion. Some still in office clothes from the champagne celebration. Some in pajamas, clearly dragged from sleep. All united by the particular terror of watching something important break and not knowing how to fix it. Jonathan's camera was off, just a black square with his name. But his voice came through tight with something that might have been fear if he'd allowed himself to feel it fully. Or maybe just the recognition that certain lies have expiration dates. "Maya, thank God you're here. We're seeing catastrophic system failure. Complete platform outage. Database is unresponsive. Application servers timing out everywhere. Authentication service completely down. Nothing we've tried is working. We need your architecture expertise. What do we do?" I could have answered immediately. Could have walked them through the remediation plan I'd documented 3 weeks ago. Could have been the hero of this particular disaster. Could have saved the day and proven my value and earned gratitude from people who'd dismissed my warnings when salvation was still cheap. Instead, I said calmly, "Tell me what you're seeing." They explained, spoke over each other, panic making their technical descriptions fragmented. Database connection, exhaustion. Memory leaks in the authentication service, cascade failures across the microservice mesh. Every symptom I'd predicted, every failure mode I'd mapped, every disaster scenario I'd documented in slides that Jonathan had decided were too inconvenient for $240 million. I let them talk, asked clarifying questions, made them walk through their troubleshooting steps. Had they checked the connection pool? Yes. Memory leaks? Yes. Retry configuration? Yes, yes, yes. Everything I'd documented 3 weeks ago. Everything they were discovering now through expensive trial and error. 11 minutes. I let it go for 11 minutes. Not out of cruelty. Or not entirely. But because I needed them to feel the full weight of not knowing. The panic of watching systems fail and not understanding why. the helplessness of trying solutions that don't work because you're treating symptoms instead of causes. I needed them to understand what it felt like to be right too late. Then, very calmly, I said, "I'm going to share my screen." Pulled up the presentation Jonathan had deleted, all 147 slides, recovered from my personal backup. The file he'd erased at 2:37 in the morning while everyone else slept. The truth he'd decided was too expensive to acknowledge. The Zoom gallery went very quiet. "This," I said, my voice steady in a way that felt almost surgical, "is what's happening right now. And this is what I tried to tell you 3 weeks ago." I walked them through it. Every failure point, every cascade, every metric that had been screaming warnings for weeks. The database connection pool sized for last year's traffic. The authentication, service memory leaks that compounded under sustained load. The retry logic that turned isolated failures into systemic collapse. Showed them slide 47, current traffic patterns. Slide 63, cascade failure modes. Slide 82, projected breaking points. Every prediction proving itself accurate in real time. Then I showed them the remediation strategies, the implementation timelines, the exact steps needed to prevent precisely this scenario. The solutions that had been ready 3 weeks ago. That could have been implemented before the Series C closed, before Jonathan bought Champagne, before the platform collapsed under the weight of growth he'd known was coming. "These are the fixes," I said. "They'll take approximately 6 days to implement properly. We can start immediately. But first, I want everyone to see slide 148. That slide hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. I'd added it that morning, after watching Jonathan celebrate with champagne and platinum certainty, after calculating how many hours until mathematics proved itself more powerful than narrative. It was a screenshot. File deletion log. Jonathan Chen. Date, October 2nd. Time, 02:37, 14 a.m. File, critical infrastructure review presentation. Status, permanently deleted. Below it, arranged in neat chronological order, screenshots from my email archives. Every warning I'd sent, every risk I'd documented, every dismissal I'd received. Systems holding steady. You're overthinking this. Trust the architecture. The silence that followed had weight, physical presence, the kind you feel in your chest. In that moment, 23 people were all reaching the same conclusion simultaneously, all watching the story Jonathan had been telling rewrite itself in real time. "For the record," I said into that weighted silence, my voice very calm, very clear. I documented these risks before the Series C closed, before investors committed $240 million. Someone chose not to disclose them. Jonathan's camera clicked on suddenly. His face appeared on screen, pale in the blue light of his monitor. Hair disheveled, tie loosened. That platinum watch just visible at the edge of frame, catching light like a small accusation. "Maya." His voice was careful now. Too careful. Let's not what, Jonathan? Tell the truth? Everyone on this call can see the timestamps. They can see that I documented the risks, that you deleted the presentation, that you dismissed every subsequent warning. The board is watching. Legal is watching. The CFO is watching. I think they deserve to know why $200 million of investor capital is currently backing a platform that just catastrophically failed in exactly the way I predicted it would. The silence that followed was different, heavier, the kind that precedes not just consequences, but the systematic dismantling of carefully constructed narratives, the kind that changes org charts and board compositions and the stories companies tell about themselves. Then Margaret Whitfield spoke, board chair, former Fortune 500 CEO. Someone who'd seen enough corporate catastrophes to recognize the anatomy of this one. Her voice was very calm, very cold. The temperature of decisions made at altitudes where sentiment doesn't survive. Jonathan, my office, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Don't be late. Not an invitation, a summons, the kind that precedes terminations and investigations and legal reviews. She continued, her attention shifting. Maya, can you fix this? I looked at my second glass of wine. Still full, still waiting. Then back at the camera, at 23 faces watching, at the monitoring dashboard showing a platform on fire, at Jonathan's pale face and expensive watch, at the wreckage of systems that had been designed to fail and had done exactly that. Yes, I said, I can fix this. Not because I wanted to be the hero, not because I needed the validation, but because fixing broken systems is what I do, because the mathematics of remediation were clear in my head, because 83 people depended on this company, and they hadn't chosen to work for someone who'd delete presentations at 3 in the morning. I'll need full authority, I continued, complete access to all systems, final say on technical decisions, and everyone who's been dismissing warnings for the past 3 weeks needs to start listening now. Margaret didn't hesitate. Done. Jonathan, you're off technical decisions, effective immediately. Maya, your lead on the recovery. Whatever you need, report directly to me. I looked at Jonathan's face on screen, watching him process what had just happened. The power shift, the narrative collapse, the moment when charm stops working and only competence matters. His platinum watch caught the light one more time. Expensive, beautiful, meaningless. Let's get to work, I said. The remediation took 6 days. I worked from the same conference room where Jonathan had canceled my presentation. Floor-to-ceiling windows. View of the financial district. But this time, I was leading the recovery effort. My architecture, my timeline, my decisions. The team was brilliant. Once they understood the problems, they solved them with the kind of focused intensity that comes from knowing exactly what failure costs. We rebuilt the authentication service, refactored the database layer, implemented load balancing that should have existed from the beginning. Jonathan didn't attend any of the meetings. On the third day, the board announced his departure. Mutual decision. Pursuing other opportunities. The usual corporate euphemisms for you're fired and you're lucky we're not suing you. They offered me the CTO position that afternoon. I sat in that conference room, my conference room now, technically, and looked at the offer letter. The title I'd earned, the equity I deserved, the validation I'd spent 8 months working toward. And I thought about Jonathan's watch catching the light, his practiced smile, the way he deleted my work at 3 in the morning because protecting his payday mattered more than protecting the company. I thought about the kind of person who builds organizations where truth is inconvenient. I thought about whether I wanted to inherit that. Thank you, I said to the board chair, but I'm going to decline. She looked surprised. Not many people turned down the corner office. I'll stay through the recovery, I continued. Make sure the platform's stable. Document everything so the next person doesn't have to guess. But after that, I'm done. Can I ask why? I looked out at the city. 3 in the morning, those lights had looked like ambition. Dawn, they'd looked like weapons. Now, at 3 in the afternoon, with autumn sun slanting through glass, they just looked like buildings. Expensive monuments to other people's definitions of success. Because I learned something important, I said. Being right isn't the same as winning, and winning isn't the same as being free. She studied me for a long moment, that boardroom calculation happening behind her eyes. You realize you could write your own ticket after this. Any company would want you. I know. And you're still walking away. I'm still walking away. She nodded slowly, maybe understanding, maybe just accepting. The offer stands. If you change your mind, doors always open. But doors aren't promises. They're just spaces between rooms. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is keep walking past them. The days after that conversation moved with strange slowness. I continued leading the recovery effort, but something had shifted. The work remained important. Systems needed fixing. Documentation needed writing. Teams needed coordination. But the urgency had changed quality. I was no longer fighting for my place in this company. I was closing a chapter with the precision of someone who knows exactly when the story ends. People treated me differently. Deference where there had been dismissal. Questions asked with genuine curiosity rather than patronizing tolerance. Engineers who'd ignored my warnings for weeks now hung on every technical decision. The board chair sent daily check-ins. The CFO asked my opinion on hiring. Everyone wanted something from the person who'd been right. It should have felt like vindication. Should have felt like finally being seen. Instead, it felt like watching people fall in love with a version of you that only existed because you'd survived their neglect. Late one night, finishing documentation in the empty office, I found myself thinking about Jonathan. Not with anger anymore, just curiosity about the person he'd been before the platinum watch and the deleted presentations. Before he'd learned that charm could substitute for competence, that confidence could override evidence, that being liked was easier than being right. He'd probably started like me, someone who believed documentation mattered, someone who thought systems should work properly, someone who confused being good at the work with being valued for it. Then somewhere along the way, maybe at his first exit, maybe at his second, maybe in some conference room where telling the truth would have cost him something he wanted more, he'd made a different choice. Had learned that narrative was more powerful than mathematics, that the story you told about systems mattered more than whether they actually worked. Until the night when mathematics stopped caring about his stories. I wondered if he'd learned anything from it, if catastrophic system failure had taught him what success never could, or if he was already crafting the narrative of his next company, his next exit, his next opportunity to confuse confidence with competence. I hoped he'd learned, but I wasn't optimistic. People who delete truth at 3 in the morning rarely learn from consequences. They just get better at hiding evidence. The recovery progressed with the steady rhythm of problems being properly solved. Database layer, refactored and stress-tested. Authentication service, rebuilt with memory management that wouldn't leak under sustained load. Load balancing, implemented with the capacity planning we should have done a year ago. Every fix documented not just with what was changed, but why, creating a trail that future engineers could follow when these decisions stopped being obvious. On the 5th day, we ran the first full systems test. Simulated traffic at twice our current peak load. Watched the metrics hold steady. No cascade failures, no timeout spirals, no authentication service collapse. Just systems working the way they were supposed to. The way they could have worked all along if someone had chosen to listen 3 weeks earlier. The team celebrated. Champagne again, though this time nobody mentioned Jonathan's name. Just relief and pride, and the particular exhaustion that comes from fixing something that should never have broken. I drank water and finished my documentation. Tomorrow, I'd start the transition plan. Start teaching someone else how these systems worked. Start preparing for the conversation where I'd explain that I was leaving. That night, alone in the office, after everyone else had gone home to celebrate properly, I pulled up the original presentation one more time, the one Jonathan had deleted, scrolled through those 147 slides that had been too inconvenient for $240 million. Every prediction had been accurate, every failure mode had manifested, every timeline had held. The mathematics had been patient, inevitable, indifferent to corporate politics and funding timelines and platinum watches that caught the light. I'd been right about the systems, right about the risks, right about what would happen when growth exceeded capacity. But being right hadn't protected me from being ignored, hadn't prevented the catastrophe, hadn't changed anything until the catastrophe had already happened and millions of dollars had been lost and customers had been locked out and 83 people had spent 18 hours in panic mode fixing what should never have broken. Being right had just meant I got to say, "I told you so," while standing in the wreckage. And now people wanted to reward me for it. Give me the corner office, the equity, the title, the authority to prevent the next Jonathan Chen from deleting the next presentation. But I understood something they didn't. Something I'd learned watching those red alerts multiply. Watching Jonathan's practiced confidence dissolve. Watching systems collapse in exactly the patterns I'd predicted. The problem wasn't one bad CTO. The problem was a system that rewarded the wrong things, that valued confidence over competence, that made ignoring warnings seem rational until catastrophe made them expensive, that only listened to truth after paying the maximum possible price for dismissing it. Taking the corner office wouldn't fix that. It would just make me the next person trying to prevent disasters in an organization that had proven it couldn't hear warnings until they became crises. I closed the presentation, backed it up one more time, saved copies in 3 different locations because some lessons are too expensive to forget. Then I started writing my resignation letter. I turned in my resignation 6 weeks later. By then, the platform was stable. Traffic growing steadily without the panic of impending collapse. The documentation comprehensive enough that new engineers could understand not just how the systems worked, but why they'd been built that way. Every decision justified. Every trade-off explained. Every lesson from the failure encoded into architecture that wouldn't make the same mistakes. The new CTO, someone from outside, someone who hadn't been shaped by Jonathan's culture of convenient truth, was ready to take over. Smart, competent, asked good questions, listened to answers, understood that systems run on mathematics, not charm. On my last day, I packed up my desk at sunset. The office was mostly empty. People had gone home to their families, their lives, their problems that weren't mine anymore. The conference room on the 42nd floor sat empty, windows reflecting orange light like fire that had burned itself out. I took the elevator down alone. 37 seconds of descent that felt like decompression. Crossed the marble lobby where I'd walked every morning for 8 months. Shoes clicking against stone that was expensive because it looked permanent. Pushed through the glass doors into evening air that smelled like rain and possibility, and the particular freedom of knowing you finished something difficult. My heels clicked against pavement as I walked toward the subway. A steady rhythm, proof of forward motion. Behind me, the tower rose into a darkening sky, its windows starting to light up one by one. Other people's ambitions, other people's late nights, other people's choices about what they'd compromise for corner offices and equity packages, and the chance to be proven right. I kept walking. Not because I'd won, not because I'd lost, but because I'd learned the most important lesson that glass tower had to teach. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a victory you don't want to claim. The rain started as I descended into the subway. Soft at first, then harder. Above ground, those glass towers were getting washed clean, water running down surfaces that would look pristine again by morning. Below, trains were arriving and departing on schedules that existed before my ambition and would continue long after it. I'd saved the company, exposed the corruption, proven every claim I'd made in that deleted presentation, turned catastrophe into clarity, chaos into documentation, failure into learning. And then I'd chosen to leave anyway. Not because staying would have been wrong, but because staying would have meant believing that being proven right was reward enough. That vindication could substitute for freedom. That the corner office was worth inheriting the compromises that had made it necessary in the first place. And I'd spent too many nights at 3 in the morning, watching numbers that told the truth while people chose convenient lies, to settle for that. The train arrived. Doors opened. I stepped inside and found a seat by the window. As we pulled away from the station, the city scrolled past in flashes. Buildings and lights and reflections of other people's definitions of success. Somewhere in one of those towers, someone was probably deleting a presentation right now, hiding inconvenient truths, making compromises that felt necessary, choosing narrative over numbers, because the story was easier to live with than the mathematics. I hoped they'd be luckier than Jonathan, hoped the systems would hold, hoped someone would be there with documentation and backups and the particular courage that comes from knowing you're right even when being right is expensive. But mostly, I hoped they'd learn what I'd learned. That success, measured in corner offices and equity packages and titles that sound impressive at dinner parties, is just one kind of winning, and not necessarily the kind worth fighting for. That sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is build something properly, document it completely, and then walk away before you become the kind of person who deletes truth at 3 in the morning. The train descended deeper underground. The window went dark, showing only my reflection. Hair still pulled back, eyes tired but clear. Lipstick mostly gone, but that was fine. I didn't need to look like someone whose work mattered anymore. The work had mattered. The documentation would outlive anyone's memory of who wrote it. The systems would run better because I'd been there. The next crisis would be smaller because I'd made this one visible. That was enough. That was more than enough. Outside, rain continued to fall on glass towers and expensive watches, and all the small compromises people make in service of definitions of success they didn't choose for themselves. And I rode the train home, free in ways that corner offices can't measure.